last week, Joseph Gordon-Levitt got on stage in front of Congress, flanked by members from the Heritage Foundation, and started parroting talking points from Ted Cruz, which Joseph Gordon-Levitt is not the person that you would think would be the one to do that. Joseph Gordon-Levitt has a history of being someone who many people associate with being, at the very least liberal, certainly not MAGA associated, certainly not pro-Trump, certainly not pro-ICE, and certainly not pro internet surveillance or internet censorship. But unfortunately, he got on stage and started advocating for the repeal or the sunset of something called Section 230. Now, if you're not super well versed in internet safety law or internet law, regulatory law of any kind, you probably never heard of this before. I certainly hadn't. And today we're going to be talking about internet safety and some of the ways that certain attempts to address internet safety could lead to an incredible censorship of the internet and a really dangerous precedent for a lot of far-reaching, wider issues that if you're not aware of, which we as a general populace, I would say, are not all super brushed up on our internet safety and regulatory laws, then we might not realize, we might not clock that this could be quite dangerous. So I am today talking about Section 230, which is a motion that is attempting to be passed through Congress and that has a bipartisan effort to support it. So that means that there are both Democrats and Republicans pushing to push this bill through. So what is Section 230 and why was Joseph Gordon-Levitt involved in this? Where is his name coming up? Why? Joseph Gordon-Levitt does not make many public appearances, and when he does, it causes waves. So for him to have largely been, I won't say out of the public eye, but not, as far as I know, he's not promoting any films. He's not promoting he has his own small business website called Hit Record. His website is something that is made for, kind of like YouTube, for average users to be able to create their own movies, short films, or media of any kind and upload it onto his platform, Hit Record. So he, has, some understanding, I believe, of how small businesses function on the internet. And this is important because for him to be getting up onto a stage in front of Congress and advocating for the complete repeal of Section 230 is it's a choice once we know what that means. So Section 230, let's do a bit of a explanation of what that is. Section 230 was passed 30 years ago in the mid-90s when the internet was just really getting started, because I keep forgetting that the internet came out 1994 was, I think, when it first officially launched for public use, but it wasn't in broad use until the late 90s, early 2000s, and the entire fervor that created and the complete way that changed how humans communicate and operate has been documented in bajillions of movies, documentaries, and obviously just in the basic way that we have lived as a species since its onset. It was originally largely a kind of file sharing medium where until the launch of Google, it was a place where you could create forums to discuss different concepts. There wasn't a huge amount of large file sharing people were capable of, but as the internet progressed over time, it changed. And with the growth of the internet becoming a place that had attracted more and more people and more opportunities for engagement, certain, regulatory laws began to be put in place in order to ensure the safety of its users. Now, Section 230 was actually enacted because of The Wolf of Wall Street. You know how they made that 2012 film, The Wolf of Wall Street, with Leonardo DiCaprio? And in the film, it's quite clear, quite immediately that, The Wolf of Wall Street was a Ponzi scheme investor. He was somebody who was really, really good at creating businesses and is an incredible salesperson. So he's really good at creating businesses that would operate in ways that could gain the most amount of money for him at the expense of his investors. And there was a website at the time called Prodigy, where a whistleblower who had worked with one of the Wolf of Wall Street's companies published basically a whistleblowing report of the fact that it was, he was operating these scams and he was scamming people out of massive amounts of money. It was one of the things that could have easily led to his downfall. It didn't immediately at that point, but what it did end up doing was leading to a suit that was brought by the Wolf of Wall Street's firm against the internet website that was like internet provider, the website that hosted the forum that the whistleblower used to publish their findings. And what the website, or what the suit alleged, was that the website who hosted this whistleblowing report was at fault for essentially defamatory content, because the website had some moderation on it to maintain a family-friendly environment to ensure that it was safe to use for all ages. And as a result, the courts at the time established that the website was at fault for hosting defamatory content, which was actually ultimately verified to be true, because the whistleblower had published this report. It was ultimately true content outlining how the Wolf of Wall Street had scammed lots of people and, had done illegal activities. And at the time, it was like this kind of landmark situation where the website that had been used was a smaller website. It was not a wealthy website or a media giant that was capable of going through an extended suit with a wealthy company like the Wolf of Wall Street's firm to protect itself. So the world kind of saw this, and it became very clear as soon as the Wolf of Wall Street was properly investigated that it was, completely not okay for the Wolf of Wall Street to be able to use their money and power to bring down the platform that had allowed a whistleblower to publish their findings. And that it became a kind of landmark situation where the establishment of a new law was put in place that was actually at the time called the Family and Safety Act. And it was a big component of that act was called Section 230. Now, within that section, this is the area that defines that if a smaller website is operating on the internet and a user on that website posts something, that the website is not responsible for what that user posts. That says nothing about moderation and the requirement of the website to moderate. That says nothing about the website being allowed to host criminal activity or to be host criminal content like CSAM or be used as a brokerage space for illegal activity, which is what happens a lot on the dark web, or what we've seen happen on Telegram multiple times with the reveal of the nth rooms, and also 734, that weird internet cult that was operating out of Texas by like a teenager for CSAM content and things like that. Section 230 was established to protect smaller websites and platforms from being essentially bullied in the court system through expensive lawsuits out of being able to host their websites. And it ensured that user-generated content could be posted by users, and the websites that host them wouldn't be like liable or at fault as long as the content was not criminal. Because a criminal content is fully capable of being taken to court and litigated. But that still would be at the fault of the user and not necessarily the website, unless they had been found to be actively promoting criminal content, which has allowed a essentially indie internet to just grow since the years of Section 230's establishment, which was 30 years ago. So why would Joseph Gordan-Levitt be wanting to repeal this? Well, possibly because of this recent global awareness of how much the internet can be used even on platforms that are seen as completely unrelated, like again messaging apps, or on various websites where CSAM is able to be distributed, or really harmful content can affect a whole range of vulnerable populations. There's been even what you could say what's happened with Grok, where Twitter has been used to create CSAM and SA material of completely non-consenting users through the use of AI, that there is an understandable desire to have a better regulatory structure in regards to the internet. So instead, you've got this new push for a bipartisan bill called the Sunset Section 230 Act, which would effectively repeal the ability of smaller businesses to be protected from huge lawsuits that could completely bankrupt them if any users on their platforms post information or content of any kind that could be litigated. I wonder if that's another reason they asked for Joseph Gordan-Levitt in this, because of this kind of connection he has as a owner of the website Hit Record, which is a smaller business that would be directly affected by the repeal of Section 230, but he didn't seem to realize that at the time. So Joseph Gordan-Levitt got up on stage to address Congress and said, he said this.
So I understand what Section 230 did to bring about the birth of the internet. That was 30 years ago. And I also understand how the internet has changed since then. Because back then, message boards and other websites with user-generated content, they really were more like telephone carriers. They were neutral platforms.
Okay, so I wanted to pause real quick to highlight something that he just said, which was, they're like telephone carriers. Like these different platforms were like telephone carriers. They're neutral platforms. Now this is where the Ted Cruz talking points come in. Ted Cruz has been kind of spouting this concept of like neutral carriers when it comes to websites that host user-generated content for years. But let's see what he says about this so that you can get a little bit more context.
That's not how things work anymore. Today, the internet is dominated by a small handful of these gigantic businesses that are not at all neutral, but instead algorithmically amplify whatever gets the most attention and maximizes ad revenue. And we know what happens when we let these engagement optimization algorithms be the lens that we see the world through. We get a mental health crisis, especially amongst young people. We get a rise in extremism and a rise in conspiracy theories. And then, of course, we get these echo chambers. These algorithms, they amplify the demonization of the other side so badly that we can't even have a civil conversation. It seems like we can't agree on anything. And yet, one of the only things that the American public seems to agree broadly on right now, left, right, and center, Republicans, Democrats, independents, we all agree that we don't trust these big tech businesses and we don't like the influence they're having on our lives and the lives of our kids. Well, if we want to do something about that, the right first step is to sunset Section 230. It's not going to solve everything, but it is the right first step. And I take a lot of hope being in this room today. This is truly a bipartisan group of people, and it's really representing the will of the American people. Despite the tech industry spending all kinds of money hiring lobbyists trying to kill this thing, we are here. So I want to thank Senator Durbin, Senator Graham for co-sponsoring this bill, and I have a message for all the other senators out there. I want to see this thing pass 100-0. There should be nobody voting to give any more impunity to these tech companies. Nobody. It's time for a change. Let's make it happen. Thank you.
That was a lot. He sounds so good though, right? He sounds like he's really trying to fight the good fight to protect small businesses and the internet at large and free speech against tech oligarchs that are trying to control us as a population and our safety. And he's also trying to positively affect the mental health of the youth using technology and being shaped and warped by it. Even this speech that he gave, it has a lot of fluff in it, but he's not identifying how Section 230 is causing harm to any of the communities he's saying he wants to protect. Instead, he's saying, by the end of this, I want to see Section 230 repealed 100-0, meaning 100 votes in favor, 0 votes against it. What would that actually mean, though? Like, if you repealed Section 230, what would happen? Well, it would be really bad. Section 230 is effectively one of the only bulwarks that any platform on the internet has to protect itself from defamation laws or from being even threatened about suits if any user that gets on that platform says something that is, inflammatory. If you repeal Section 230, what would that actually look like? So it would look like the act that actually encouraged its passing in the first place, which was when the Wolf of Wall Street, his law firm, decided to go after a small website, like a small platform where a whistleblower was able to publish accurate data and accurate reporting about crimes being committed, and term those reports as defamation and lead to the destruction of that website, because the website cannot afford a multi-million-dollar suit being brought against it. Now, at the moment, that doesn't mean that websites currently don't face suits for defamation or hosting harmful content on their platforms. But at present, the amount of money that would cost on average is more money than I can fathom, that I have ever seen at once. But it's like, $50,000 to maybe $100,000 for a lawsuit, which for a smaller platform that is still, a successful platform, but a smaller platform, that's still doable. It might not be great, but it won't completely destroy the platform. But what the repeal of Section 230 would mean is that only tech giants could afford to handle any lawsuits against them, because the new price would be much higher. It would be upwards of $5 million. And an average smaller website would not be able to handle that. That is a huge, huge red flag because of where it could lead. So just like how Section 230 establishes a base of protection for smaller companies to be able to host platforms that can allow user-generated content of all kind, including content that is actively, anti-government or whistleblowers, as Casey identified, or, any of those things, it pressures the larger companies to also have that standard. So it means that even though YouTube has pretty intense censorship in regards to what words you can say without being demonetized, they can only do that through demonetization. They can't completely destroy the platform by having a list of words you can and cannot say. So it pressures larger organizations, larger companies to allow people to have, commentary that is maybe critical of the government, or talks about abortion, or acknowledges the legitimacy of S work, or talks about SA, or talks about health, or talks about being LGBTQIA, like all of these things that are in Project 2025, for example, are goals to be dismantled and removed from public discourse and public acceptance. And the repeal of Section 230 is part of Project 2025. That is why members of the Heritage Foundation are pushing for this, like Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham. Because the Heritage Foundation, which drafted Project 2025, is what has led to every single thing that this current president has done. The ICE raids, the deportations, the detention centers, all of that is the playbook that was written out in Project 2025. So this is another step in that. And the one reason they're enacting it now is, again, to ensure that our ability as a populace to be able to share information about responding to these new regulations and these new essentially attacks on the American people I'm allowed to even say that, because without Section 230, there'd be no way for me to say that, because instead what would happen is people, especially smaller platforms, would preemptively remove any content that might be seen as defamatory or that might get them threatened with a suit. Because if you threaten, then there's still space for somebody to respond and say, oh, never mind, I'll get that off this platform. You'll never see this again. Don't worry about it. Whereas if their suit is actually brought, that could mean the end of that company forever, and even the complete bankruptcy of anybody who is named as an owner or responsible for that company. So that could really, really mess up essentially the entire concept of free speech on the internet. And without there being this indie internet that is able to encourage, because of how big the internet is, and how many indie internet sites there are and platforms there are that have user-generated content, that could mean that larger platforms don't have to deal with that pressure anymore. So even if they can handle the suits that might be brought against them, who's to say that they even have to? They can instead start implementing their own censorship that is significantly more targeted and significantly more serious. So I wouldn't even be able to say in any way, shape, or form, or write any commentary that could be seen as critiquing of the government, especially if there's no way to push back or share information, because there are, like, third party or smaller indie websites that would allow me to, or allow there to be that pressure to encourage bigger companies to recognize that there are alternatives for their population to go to if that bigger website starts cracking down too much. Just like how so many people left TikTok because it started implementing censorship. Why I'm not there right now, why we're all not there right now, because it started implementing the new TOS, and then from there started implementing censorship of anyone talking about ICE, of anybody talking about what's going on actually going on in Minnesota. What's when the government states, or Orange Cheetos states, oh, there's Portland or LA is just a bunch of burned out buildings. It's this wasteland of destruction, and then people can post from their front yards hey, nope, it's gorgeous over here right now, it's a beautiful day, don't know what you're talking about. They wouldn't be able to do that because it could be seen as it could lead to this very sincere issue with censorship. So let's go, this is, and all of this information that I'm sharing right now it takes, honestly, you Google Section 230, you can find this out really fast. So why did Joseph Gordan-Levitt not do that before getting in front of Congress? I don't know, it's a good question. This next clip I'm going to show you actually is, there we go, is him dealing with the immediate pushback he got. So he got, as one can say, ratioed to hell, because oh my God, he got such intense response, because there are activists who have been working to ensure the expansion of safe regulation of the internet for decades, and proponents of Section 230 who have worked really, really hard to explain to the general public why that matters. And also the people who even got that to pass in the first place. They are internet freedom activists. They're also people who are trying to ensure that there isn't a welcome space for cruel Epstein-style people to operate. But there is actually something very direct to this that I'm going to tell you about in just a second. So let me show you this clip real quick, so you can see what happened. All right, so this one, let me get this on, and then here we go.
So last week I went to Washington, D.C. to support a bill called the Section 230 Sunset Act. And I posted a video of my speech, got a lot of love and support from a lot of y'all out there. And so thank you for that. But also there was a fair amount of confusion and pushback, and people raising some very good points that I want to discuss. One point that's not true is I did not get paid to support this bill. But I actually think a lot of the people that were raising a lot of these good points are people that we probably agree on, almost all of this. We want an internet that has vibrant, free, productive public discourse. I don't think we currently have that. And, the question is, of course, is this Section 230 Sunset Act a good way to get there? Well, let's talk about it, because that's the whole point of this, right? Here's the first thing I'll say. I'm in favor of reforming Section 230. I'm not in favor of eliminating all of the protections that it affords. I'm going to repeat that because it's really the crux of this. I'm in favor of reforming, upgrading, modernizing Section 230 because it was passed 30 years ago. I am not in favor of eliminating all of the protections that it affords. Look, I co-founded an online community called Hit Record with a website with a community of about 1 million people when it was the biggest, and but oftentimes it's been small. We were a small business, and I completely recognize that if a small business like Hit Record could be held liable for all of the things that anybody might post on a user-generated content platform, we wouldn't be able to afford the legal bills and it could put us out of business. So I really do understand the logic behind Section 230. That said, the internet has changed a lot, and a relatively simple platform like Hit Record is not how most people are using the internet nowadays. Most people are using a small handful of these gigantic businesses that are driven by engagement optimization algorithms and advertising revenue. And I would argue this is actually really bad for productive public discourse.
Okay, so I want to just start with that because he does start to get into another component that I think he's hitting the nail on the head, that there are bigger problems here. But I think it's very interesting that he is walking back so quickly and saying, you know, I didn't want a repeal of Section 230. I wanted a reform. When he literally was saying, I want you to pass this 100-0. Get rid of this bill. Get rid of this provision. Get rid of this protection. And now he's saying, now that he's gotten pushback and he's gotten flack and he's gotten accused of getting paid and he's been, contacted by internet activists for, the last week, he's like, oh, oops, actually, I want to reform this bill because it's 30 years old and it just hasn't worked as well, and things have changed. And he's not wrong, things have changed. There are massive tech giants that have changed the way that we operate as an entire global population because of social media and the way that social media has become so integrated into every component of how we move through the world. But I think that Joseph Gordan-Levitt, for example, had to identify for himself, oh wait, hold up a second. Now that I've realized that this will negatively affect me, maybe I want to walk that back. Maybe I don't believe in this anymore. And that's okay. I mean, whatever. But it's just so ridiculous that you have this person who is presenting themselves as an informed individual and is unwilling to do accurate research before they get in front of Congress to advocate for the repeal. And then you've got the Heritage Foundation being able to say, well, look, we've got this label guy, Joseph Gordan-Levitt, who's for this too, and we were able to get all of these other people who were for this too, but did they do accurate research? No. Did it take me that long to do accurate research? No. Would it take anybody that long to do research on this topic? Not really, no. All you actually have to really do, if you think about it, is look at what started Section 230 to begin with, to understand the importance of it. Now, I could totally understand if you would like to have introduce perhaps a new law that would allow for just like we could have a law to help regulate billionaires. If you want to view companies, which unfortunately are viewed as people, if you want to regulate companies that have this mega reach across the world and that have armies, buildings full of lawyers that can litigate day and night to destroy any company that doesn't have the money to be able to put up with them. If you want to be able to regulate those people, then yes, absolutely. Partner with activists who have been doing this work for a long time if you yourself are not as informed. But we're not seeing that happen. We're not seeing that happen with Joseph Gordan-Levitt. Instead, he's trying to backpedal, and then also now he's starting to say, well, okay, so here's this legitimate issue. I wonder what he's going to say about how to fix this. Let's find out. I do not have high hopes.
So the question is, can't we have both? Can we protect free speech and the First Amendment while also holding these big tech companies accountable? Well, there have been lots of efforts to reform Section 230 in the past, and they keep getting killed by the big tech lobbyists. So this Section 230 Sunset Act is, as far as I understand it, a strategy towards reform. It'll force the tech companies to the negotiating table. That's why I supported it. So what would it look like if we were to reform Section 230? Well, that's a really good question. It's why I think it's actually really good that a lot of passionate people are raising their voices and saying, well, we have to make sure to protect this and we have to make sure to not lose that. But what if we could do this and what if we could do that? That's what democracy looks like, right? Is those discussions. I will tell you that for me, the most inspiring and intelligent proposal for Section 230 reform that I've seen comes from two of my favorite thinkers in this space, named Jaron Lanier and Audrey Tang. In fact, I'm going to pull up their article right now, which is called Sunset Section 230 and Unleash the First Amendment. Yeah, it's co-authored by Jaron Lanier, Audrey Tang, as well as Allison Stranger. I even was able to correspond with Audrey before going to DC. Audrey said, yes, we will have to subsequently make sure that we protect certain things that 230 protects. One example she gave was we didn't make sure that an app like Signal, which is an app I use, it's for extreme privacy when you're sending text messages and stuff, that we make sure that any reform doesn't harm an operation like Signal. But yes, she said, I think sometimes in order to bring about the new, we need to sunset.
Okay, so what is he talking about? Who are these people? So he's mentioned 3 different people. None of those people are versed in internet law. Audrey Tang, for example, is actually the digital minister for Taiwan. She's a fascinating person, and all of these people are fascinating people. But the things that they have proposed, and the particular article that he's talking about, which is quite lengthy, and there's quite a lot into that, so I'm not going to go too deep into it because I know that we will be here for hours if I do. It's not the suggestion or the option that Joseph Gordon-Levitt is trying to propose it to be. Instead, like I was saying earlier with the First Amendment issue, it is relying far too much on this belief that the government, especially under the current administration, can operate as a healthy mediator for censorship. And one of the issues is, in a perfect world, heck yeah, I could totally see it. But we're not in that space. We're in a space where we even have to have these conversations at all because we can't necessarily ensure that big tech giants are actually going to be kept in check in any way, shape, or form by something like the First Amendment. The First Amendment isn't enough to keep these companies in check. Now, is Section 230 enough? Not anymore. It is very true that we are at a point where we don't have the regulation that we actually need to be able to handle this and this mega tech giant issues that we have. Now, there were some acts that we did used to have that were about breaking up trusts. Trusts are when one corporation buys up all of its competitors in order to be the only company or the primary company offering services to a particular area or group, which then allows that company to set its own prices without any pushback or competition. Competition in that regard is super, super necessary if you want to make sure that, there is actually affordable rates for things. Now, he also talked about reform of Section 230 and how, it hasn't been reformed in 30 years. That's actually not true. In 2018, Section 230 was reformed and an amendment was added to it that was called the FOSTA SESTA. What that did was repealed certain protections. And we have absolutely seen since 2018 a marked difference in how the internet has operated, because which companies started to explode after 2018? I wonder. Meta? YouTube? TikTok? Corporations owned by Larry Ellison and Peter Thiel? Just saying. Like, there has actually been a very clear example of what happens when you reform Section 230 by repealing components of it. Also, if you think about it, there's, saying you should sunset something is kind of questionable, because the concept of sunset and that term comes from like a sunset town where it is unsafe to be in that town after dark if you are a person of color, because the residents of that town will view you as open season. So, again, a choice. Maybe not. But, so the article that he's, talking about ultimately is not actually the gotcha that he thinks it is. And I'm going to list all of the sources that I have for this in Discord, but also in the, we have to talk about Discord as well. Also in the notes for the video when I have this edited and up. But yeah, it's concerning. So so you can absolutely read through the articles that were that he was talking about with the kind of like, let's repeal 230 or reform 230 and rely on the First Amendment a little bit more. They're not really offering alternatives that are actually actionable and would actually keep big tech in check. Now, here's another thing that I think is a little interesting when it comes to Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He is married to one of a previous board member from OpenAI, Sam Altman's AI company that launched ChatGPT. Another thing I wanted to point out is that I think that if you actually read the bill, it would be really clear this wasn't a reform. Let me show you. So here is, oh, it's a little video and it's already starting. That's cool. Okay, proud of myself here. So here's the people who are involved in it. Mr. Graham, Mr. Durbin, and then it's for the 230 Communication Act. And it's not just the reform. It says right here, Section 2, repeal, the sunset of the act, which means the removal of the act. So I was going through the whole little thing. And it's actually an updated act from multiple other forms of regulation that we've had for different, it hasn't been passed yet, but it's up for being passed soon. And the main sponsor is Lindsey Graham, who is a member of the Heritage Foundation. I think that in and of itself should probably tell you enough. But Joseph Gordon-Levitt has been having some interesting friends recently, and I want to talk about that in regards to his kind of presentation as somebody who is, I guess, more left-leaning. At least that's how most people assume him to be. But even though he kind of has showed himself to be in some way comfortable being on stage and present with the Heritage Foundation, he's also married to somebody who was a board member for OpenAI, and Sam Altman's OpenAI is what's ChatGPT, which has led to many issues with one, the financial destruction of many artistic avenues for artists all over the world, as well as a direct effect, I would argue. I don't have the data right now to show this, but it definitely has been affecting the entry-level job opportunities for many of us. and also a requirement that you now need to be able to work with AI in order to do many jobs that previously didn't need that. We've been seeing definitely a negative, I think, overall net negative effect on how AI has affected many people's ability to do research, how many people have been able to attain jobs that might allow them to get to maybe a middle class state of existence, or any of the kind of work yourself up by the bootstraps mentality that is the hallmark of American exceptionalism and all of that idea. But AI has directly been affecting that in a negative way. Joseph Gordon-Levitt also did go to a kind of red-pilled OF AI content creators event with Grimes, who has been, you know, a problem. She's definitely somebody who has actively supported the use of AI at the expense of smaller artists, and also has been directly linked to techno-feudalist Curtis Yarvin multiple times. Someone who is avowedly racist, does not think that there is equality among different racial groups, and thinks that people who are whatever he deems to be white are superior. So that is a problem. So Joseph Gordon-Levitt is like actively involving himself in these communities, which are these odd red-pilled communities that have been existing within Silicon Valley for quite some time, who also love Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. And, you know, Sam Altman was a student of Peter Thiel. So is JD Vance. So we're seeing these very frustrating connections that, you know, you might be able to say, well, independently, this doesn't directly say anything. And you're right, it doesn't. It just provides context for patterns that are concerning. Is that, you know, regardless of how you feel about Joseph Gordon-Levitt as a human being, what he is like propagating and he's being used to propagate is quite concerning. Because, and I'm not done, unfortunately, I'm so sorry, there is still more. So I also wanted to talk about this interesting website that I actually really appreciate, that did kind of explore all the ways that Joseph Gordon-Levitt was very much wrong in the way that he approached this full like Section 230 mess. So they do have it's from this website called TechDirt, and the author is someone named Mike Masnick, who is an activist and a reporter who I think you can definitely, I encourage you to do your own research into this. But TechDirt is relatively, I think, viewed as a helpful resource if you're trying to understand the legality of various tech updates, and, you know, trying to keep up to date yourself on how the tech world operates, as well as the legalities of many of the issues that are going on. Like this article does a really beautiful job of going through bit by bit and exploring the ways that Joseph Gordon-Levitt is wrong, but also exploring what is wrong with this mentality, which you will definitely see is a problem. So this is, again, kind of reiterating the whole component about how the concept of neutrality for a website doesn't actually matter in regards to whether or not they can be held liable for defamation or defamation, and that this could lead to significantly more dangerous outcomes if we are able as a society to have only a certain class of financially capable companies handle being having user-generated content on there that isn't like already pre-regulated. And pre-regulation is already a thing that just happens with much user-generated content as it is, to try and protect against hate speech. But it's still, if you structure this a little too intensely, it can lead to some really problematic issues. The reasons I kind of wanted to like bring this up so you can all see it and read it is because I think it's really important that we, as, you know, members of the populace who have to be able to make decisions about what we do with the information we have, are able to see that redirection is a really dangerous tactic that is really effective when it comes to passing really, really bad legislation that could affect us negatively and could possibly never be fixed. So with the deconstruction of things like Section 230, we could easily become incapable of ever arguing against the government or organizing or using the internet as a platform to organize. It could return us to that space where if, say you're LGBTQIA and you are in a primarily homophobic environment, you can't use the internet to reach out and find others like you anymore. That is something that would be affected, because if that becomes something that is no longer legally supported, then that could also mean that if you try to find out more about that topic, that could get you in trouble. If you are somebody who is in need of an abortion, this could directly affect your ability to access an abortion. So I wanted to talk about this as well because there is this. So that is really, really, really important. So again, yes, less reason to moderate. Here we go. And so, okay, there we go. So this gets into the weeds of what could go wrong and how dangerous this could get. But I also wanted to talk about the issue with FOSTA SESTA. FOSTA SESTA, when it was passed in 2018, directly led to the destruction of multiple websites and platforms that operated as safe spaces for workers to be able to work without having to be on the streets, and also to be able to have a safe way to connect with clients without getting put in harm's way. When FOSTA SESTA was passed, those platforms had to get removed, and a lot of people were kicked off, and that led to I think it was like a 10% increase in homelessness and complete financial ruin for workers on a grand scale. That's a lot when you think about like how, 10% doesn't sound that much, but it is actually quite a lot. It also led to the destruction of many different platforms' ability to organize and support abortion access and medical care and intervention and organizing across the country, which led to a lot of issues. And we have seen how you could even argue that may have supported over time the abolishment of Roe v. Wade, a Supreme Court decision. So it seems like a small little pebble being thrown in, but it has really big ripples. It could lead to tsunamis, like I'm not kidding, and it is important. Not only did I go into this kind of deep dive about Section 230, what actually kicked that off was because Discord has launched something that is going to start taking effect in March that I think is very, very concerning, and I directly think we need to figure out what we're going to do about this. Because what it is wanting to do is it's going to start implementing the immediate, essentially, requirement for any account that is seen as an adult account to be age verified. And it's saying that it's doing this to protect the children, just like the repeal of Section 230 was supposed to protect the children, just like the implementation of FOSTA SESTA was supposed to protect the children. But it's never actually about protecting the children, because as soon as these repeals or revisions happen, we see less protection of children. We see the rise of things like the nth rooms and 734. We see a lot of really horrific things being propagated. We see the rise of the alt-right through online programming and red pill content, which has been very effective in red pilling a lot of people, especially younger people, using online platforms. And none of those people are gonna get in trouble. But I bet you know who will? Anybody who's anti-gays. Anybody who keeps asking for prosecution to happen after the Epstein Files releases. Like, you know, it's going to definitely be a targeted focus if this gets removed or repealed in full. But what Discord wants to do is, supposedly to protect kids, is it's going to turn all accounts that are seen that are not age verified into teen accounts permanently. And that is going to restrict the kind of messages you can get if you can even message with anybody you don't already know. It can restrict the environments you're allowed to be in. It can mean that if you are want to be involved in like a voice chat or a video chat, you cannot be the one who is communicating. So, and it's permanent, so you can't fix it and you can't change it unless you give them your government issued ID. Now, I'm sure, you know, y'all have probably had to do this before for government programs like the Real ID, but why would it be that dangerous or difficult in a problem if it's, you know, like something like Discord? The problem is, it would mean that you would more than likely have to upload either a photo of a passport or a driver's license, and it depends on what they would qualify as being a proper ID, to identify your age, your name, even where you live, all of this information. And they would use a third-party contractor to verify this information. Now, unfortunately, Discord has already done this with a company called 5A. And 5A was hacked. And 70,000 people's information were leaked. And this isn't like just like a credit card. This isn't like a information that you can cancel. You can never cancel your identification. So 70,000 people were able to be, like, their personal information was able to be used by hackers to do whatever they wanted. And you can't fix it. You can't change it. You can't protect yourself. And even, you know, like, identity fraud is a lot harder to protect yourself from and navigate than canceling a credit card. It can often take a lot of money to be able to try and address it, and you don't even know what's happening on the dark web with that information. It can be really dangerous. Okay, so what was this whole Discord thing, and why does it align with this whole Section 230 thing? Why am I bringing these things together? Because in the UK, Discord launched a experimental program where it started doing the face identification, and instead of using the third-party company that had led to the hacking and the loss of 70,000 people's IDs, which is all information that's supposed to be deleted. None of it was deleted. It was supposed to be deleted, and it wasn't then deleted. Information was supposed to be deleted, was not supposed to be leaving anyone's personal devices either. It wasn't supposed to be going into a database, wasn't supposed to be accessible to anyone who was on the administrative side of the platform outside of that specific, like, verification process. Nope. It was totally against what had been said, against what had been promised when you uploaded your image. That information was saved and then hacked and spread out to who knows who by, you know, a third-party platform, 5A. Discord decided to do the same thing again, except with a company owned by Peter Thiel, Persona. Peter Thiel is famous for such hits as Palantir, which is used to surveil protesters and identify anybody that they may want to deport. In March, we are not going to be getting away from this, because that's when it's rolling out. Persona being owned by Peter Thiel is really, really problematic because Palantir is a company that is building a wide surveillance network that is trying to give essentially grades to every single individual in the country, so that it's easier to based on social media history, based on a whole host of things that are being used to essentially grade whether or not somebody is more or less friendly to the current administration. And the idea being that if you are less friendly, then that information can be shared with groups like ICE. And that's really a problem. That's a huge problem. It also means that anyone that is on Discord is then going to be accessible through that platform. Now, here's the other thing with Discord. Discord has been a major method of communication for, especially during internet and media blackouts in countries that needed to organize to be able to overthrow their governments. Like what happened in Nepal, that protest movement was entirely structured on Discord. And a lot of protest movements and a lot of like spaces that are in environments where they have to deal with media blackouts or internet blackouts, where being able to speak anything considered negative against the government in any way, any critique of any kind, could get you in serious legal trouble or full on in prison. It could lead to the, being removed from your job, and there being massive social repercussions that could lead to lifelong negative consequences. That, I think, to me, gives more than enough reason, especially now that we know that I don't necessarily want to be putting my information, my unchangeable identity directly in front of into a database for Palantir to then use to train its generative AI models or to train its identification AI models just by using Discord. So there has definitely been a pushback from this, and we will remain to be seen if Discord will move forward with this. But it could lead to a lot of severe consequences down the line, especially as this government gets more and tries to push more and more of these identification technologies and these pressures to limit free speech on the internet. Gotta find an alternative, and the only reason that we can do that is because of Section 230, because it hasn't been repealed, because there are companies that are alternatives that Discord can have to deal with the competition from that may encourage them not to move forward with this surveillance group. Because as much as they say it's to protect children, it's not.